Hello and welcome to Storytime for March 6, 2022. Today we are going to work on reading for a total of 10 minutes or less. We're going to work on reading fluency, which means with ease and accuracy. Now, we have been reading 2 pages, but today we are going to challenge ourselves and we're going to attempt to read 3 pages. This first page is a picture page, and here is the second page, but it is the first reading page. So I hope that you will read along with me or just listen if you prefer. But whatever the case, remember in the last video I stated that some people read better in private than they do in public, and some people may do better in public than they do in private. Whatever the situation, if you feel like it is best for you to practice your reading in private so that you will know all of your words before you have to do a public reading, then please do that in the future and read the words and the pages first that you will have to read publicly so that you will be prepared and that you will know what you're going to be reading. Are you ready? Okay. Medgar Evers, a Black World War II veteran named Medgar Evers, applied for admission to the University of Mississippi Law School in 1954. He was rejected because of his race. Later that year, he became the NAACP's first field secretary for Mississippi. His duties included helping Black residents register to vote, organizing boycotts, and recruiting new members for the NAACP. He also investigated the murder of Emmett Till and other acts of racially motivated violence. Targeted and threatened because of his work, Evers had narrowly avoided harm more than once. On June 12, 1963, he was shot and killed by Byron de la Betwick. After avoiding conviction twice, Betwick was found guilty in 1994, more than 30 years later. Evers was mourned as a national hero. He is still admired for his selfless courage and his determination in the face of great danger. The March on Washington. In the 1960s, 100 years after President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, African Americans still hadn't achieved full equality. Slavery had been replaced by sharecropping and Jim Crow laws designed to keep blacks and whites apart. Despite the Brown versus Board of Education decision of 1954, most black students still attended separate schools that were not as good as the schools for white children. Tax-paying African Americans still could not live, work, study, or shop wherever they wanted to. To bring attention to these conditions and to pressure the government to do something about it, A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin organized a rally to take place in the nation's capital. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, held on August 28, 1963 in Washington, D.C., attracted at least 250,000 people and became one of the largest public demonstrations of its kind in U.S. history. Often traveling great distances by car, bus, train, or plane to get there, citizens and celebrities gathered on the National Mall to hear speeches and performances. Rustin read a list of the group's demands, including an immediate end to school segregation and the passage of meaningful civil rights laws. Reverend King's address at the march, now known as the I Have a Dream speech, remains the most celebrated speech of the civil rights era. 4 little girls. For decades, black residents of Birmingham had referred to their city as Bombingham. Unknown criminals had set fire to more than 30 black homes and churches since 1947. The worst bombing took place on September 15, 1963, when local members of the Ku Klux Klan planted explosive in the 16th Street Baptist Church. The Klan, or KKK, was formed after the Civil War. Its members often wore white robes and hoods during their violent campaigns against integration, and racial equality. Denise McNair, Carol Robertson, Addie Mae Collins, and Cynthia Wesley, young black girls between the ages of 11 and 14, were killed in the blast. 5 men were suspected of committing the crime but went unpunished for most of their lives. Freedom Summer. In Mississippi, election officials prevented black residents from voting by charging them expensive fees called poll taxes. They also often required them to prove they could read or recite the state constitution from memory. These methods were so effective at keeping African Americans from voting that Mississippi had the lowest percentage of black voters of any state. In 1964, an alliance of civil rights groups turned their attention to guaranteeing black Mississippians the right to vote. The Council of Federated Organizations was made up of representatives from SNCC, CORE, and the NAACP. They worked together to organize a campaign that would become known as Freedom Summer. They recruited allies on college campuses, including more than 1,000 volunteers from out of state. The recruits joined thousands of black Mississippians who went from door to door to educate and encourage black residents to register to vote. They also established freedom schools, freedom libraries, and freedom clinics that provided classes and health care to African Americans. We're at under 7 minutes and we have 2 pages left. Let's see if we can do this. Cheney Goodman. We're going to stop at 10 minutes. Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner. Some groups in Mississippi, such as the White Citizens Council and the Ku Klux Klan, were violently opposed to Freedom Summer. They beat activists, harassed residents, and burned churches, while local police did nothing to stop them. On June 21, 1964, 3 Freedom Summer workers disappeared. Their bodies were found on August the 4th. They had been killed by Klansmen. The details of James Cheney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner brought even more nationwide attention to the injustices and the acts of violence being committed in the South. SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, commonly called SNCC, was founded in 1960. The group came out of a conference at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, organized by Ella Baker. Its activism included direct action protests, such as sit-ins at lunch counters and protests at libraries, swimming pools, and public parks. Members also worked hard to register black voters throughout the South. SNCC played pivotal leadership roles in the Freedom Rides, the March on Washington, Freedom Summer, and other important civil rights campaigns. Many of its leaders, including John Lewis, Robert Moses, Julian Bond, Diane Nash, Marion Barry, Eleanor Holmes Norton, and Stokely Carmichael, continued to work for equality and justice in the decades that followed. Civil Rights Act of 1964. On July the 2nd, 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was the first major civil rights legislation passed since post-Civil War Reconstitution. The act outlawed discrimination based on race in hotels, stadiums, restaurants, libraries, and other public places for the first time. African Americans would have the kind of freedom of access and movement that white citizens had always enjoyed. The law also banned job discrimination based on race, religion, gender, or national origin. That is the country where you were born. Additionally, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 allowed the freedom of the federal government to bring charges against school districts that failed to desegregate, but it still did not guarantee black citizens the right to vote in local and state elections. We're almost there. We're almost at 10 minutes, so it might cut off. But this is the 3rd page. The Freedom Democrats. Since 1980, black residents of Mississippi had not been allowed to join the local Democratic Party. During Freedom Summer,